Hey, don't forget. Watch out. Remember.
Legacy sequels suck. I'm sure that's something most of us can generally agree on, because with 3 real exceptions, legacy sequels and remakes serve no real purpose other than being soulless, derivative, black holes of creativity bent on making people fork over their hard-earned money for stuff that makes them go, oh hey, I remember that. Case in point, Jurassic World Dominion. Where the first Jurassic World was fine and Fallen Kingdom was a train wreck, Dominion took everything that sucked about Fallen Kingdom and multiplied it by 20. I mean, the CGI here was probably the strongest of the Jurassic World trilogy and the score was good, but there's not a whole lot else for this movie to grasp onto in terms of quality. So, you remember how I said that the biggest problem with The Secrets of Dumbledore was that it focused on something completely alien from what its franchise is usually associated with? Well, that also applies to Dominion. Only this time, instead of focusing on dinosaurs, it focuses on, get this, genetically modified locusts. I wish I was making this shit up. And if that wasn't ridiculous enough, the big villain this entire franchise has been leading up to is Dodgson. You know, this guy.
Dodgson! Dodgson! We've got Dodgson here! See, nobody cares.
Also, it keeps with a trend present in plenty of other Legacy sequels where it brings back the actors from the original movies for next to no reason other than nostalgia, and that really showed with Sam Neill and Laura Dern, who both sounded tired and like they just wanted to get it over with so they could get their paycheck sooner, although at least Jeff Goldblum seemed to be trying. Really, at the end of the day, it's sad to see the direction the Jurassic franchise has taken ever since Jurassic Park in 1993. It's just been a continuous downward spiral ever since then, and it all culminated with this movie. The people working on it definitely seemed focused on if they could make it, but they didn't seem to stop and think about if they should.
Not my Rodrick!
Out of all the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies, I'd easily say Rodrick Rules was the best one. Unfortunately, Disney just had to redo it for their streaming service, and it sucked. The key reason being that, like the first Disney Plus Wimpy Kid movie, it cut out way too much of the original book and movie that people liked, resulting in the end product to be a boring, directionless, and lazy content filler for Disney Plus. And when I say it was lazy, I'm mostly referring to the animation, since the CGI is extremely wooden and robotic, and the 2D animation genuinely looks like Go Animate. I mean, I have nothing against the animators, since they obviously didn't have enough time or resources to work on this in the short amount of time they had in between the 2 movies, so... Wait, this is just the Marvel VFX crisis all over again. Back onto the movie itself, one of the main reasons why I enjoyed the live-action Rodrick Rules movie as much as I did was mainly with the development and eventual bond between Greg and his brother Rodrick. Here though, it's hard to sympathize or connect with either of them because their bond mostly involves blackmail, and while their reconciliation is kinda nice when taken out of context, it doesn't feel earned because of how awful the two have been to each other up to that point, not to mention Greg doesn't even do the magic act with Rowley. You know, I've always wondered why Rowley is still friends with Greg with how much we've been shown in the books and movies of Greg bullying and manipulating the poor kid. But hey, at least this movie got something accurate about the franchise. Really, there's not a whole lot else for me to say about this movie. I guess I enjoyed Ed Asner's character and he and Greg had a nice scene together, but really that's just about it. And unfortunately, this won't even be the last we see of this animated franchise, as Jeff Kinney already has plans to adapt all 17 of his other books for Disney+. My thoughts and prayers are with the animators working on these movies.
Father, when can I leave to be on my own? I've got the whole world to see.
When the Pinocchio movie where Pinocchio sounds like Ezra Miller is better and more memorable than a remake of the Disney classic, something's definitely wrong. The 1940 adaptation of the classic Carlo Collodi story is one of the most beloved works in Walt Disney's entire filmography, and for good reason. But Disney's greed knows no bounds, it seems, so they decided to give it the live-action remake treatment with legendary director Robert Zemeckis at the helm. And you'd think that the guy who directed Who Framed Roger Rabbit would do a better job at combining live action with animation, because while the wooden boy himself looks fine, and while I guess it was kinda neat that his donkey ears and tail were also wooden, Jiminy Cricket looks like an uncircumcised alien penis. I have no idea what they were doing with Monstro. Candlewick's transformation into a donkey looks like a Snapchat filter. There's several scenes where characters clip through the CGI, and the green screen effects make the movie look like a parody YouTube video. But that's just going from a visual standpoint, and the Disney remakes never had the best CGI to begin with. Speaking of said remakes, with two exceptions, all of them have always ranged from either watchable to completely insufferable. And while the Pinocchio remake may not be as bad as the Mulan remake, it's definitely up there. One of the main reasons as to why that is involves the characterization of Pinocchio himself. For some odd reason, every bad thing that happens to him is simply because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, as opposed to in the original where he actually made mistakes and learned from them in the end. So as a result, Pinocchio doesn't really have a big arc to go through, nor does he really need Jiminy Cricket to act as his conscience, since he already seems to know right from wrong. And the ending, oh God, the ending. So for some reason, instead of Pinocchio sacrificing himself to save Geppetto and being revived as a real boy by the Blue Fairy for being brave, honest, and selfless, here Geppetto dies instead, and Pinocchio crying and singing When You Wish Upon a Star brings him back to life. And not only that, but the movie also implies that Pinocchio doesn't become a real boy in the end. I get that it's trying to send the message that you're perfect for who you are, which is fine and all, but it still completely misses the point of the original story by implying that maybe the Blue Fairy was a liar, and that all of Pinocchio's struggles throughout the course of the film were for jack shit. Another thing that this movie royally screws up would be with the acting. I guess Keegan-Michael Key sounded like he was having fun, but other than that, Benjamin Evan Ainsworth was annoying as hell. I don't even know what Joseph Gordon-Levitt was trying to do. Luke Evans is completely embarrassing as one of the most sinister and morally bankrupt Disney villains of all time, and Tom Hanks just didn't sound like he wanted to be there, and it ends up making for possibly the worst performance of his entire career. I wish I could go on, but there's only so much I can say in this video, so yeah. The Pinocchio remake is a travesty in every conceivable way. I'll probably still end up watching these soulless Disney remakes just for an excuse to shit on them, but make no mistake, this one is definitely one of the worst. And yet, there's still 2 more movies to go.
Stop posting about
Morbius!
I'm tired of seeing it!
God, the Morbius memes were annoying. The only thing worse was probably the movie itself. Everyone's already talked about just how bad this movie was, and I doubt I'll be adding much to the table, but let's explain why Morbius ended up as my second least favorite film of last year. So, every criticism you've heard about Morbius is true. I don't know if it was due to studio interference or if its director just had no idea what he was doing, but this movie's direction, pacing, and writing are a complete mess. There's no good character development whatsoever, all of the performances suck outside of Matt Smith, whose admittedly fun performance is the only reason this isn't my #1 pick. Several plot points go absolutely nowhere, and the mid-credit scenes are completely asinine. And not only that, but it also has some of the worst CGI in any superhero movie. I don't know why there were all these smear marks during the action scenes. Maybe it was to give this movie its own unique style, but it looked terrible. Plus, the lighting was so bad that there were some points where I couldn't even make out what was happening. And if that wasn't bad enough, the editing and camera work were so atrocious that I thought I was gonna be nauseous. I could go on and on about how much of a cinematic failure Morbius is, but what else is there for me to say that hasn't already been said by basically everyone else? Exactly, it's just that bad. And there's still one more movie left that some of you might already know, but before we talk about it, here are some dishonorable mentions. As previously mentioned, I saw a lot of movies this year, so not every one of them could make this list. However, here's some that I still wanted to briefly talk about because they too have their own problems. They are, in alphabetical order, Disenchanted. The first Enchanted movie was a charming and enjoyable movie with some great songs, but that was all squandered in this one, where not only were the songs a significant downgrade, but they basically turned Giselle into Wanda Maximoff for no discernible reason. Speaking of Wanda, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I wish this movie could have been good, and there were definitely some good things about it, such as the great direction, visuals, and cinematography, but unfortunately, it also has an awful script with confusing characterizations and very missed opportunities with exploring the multiverse. Hocus Pocus 2. The Sanderson sisters were really enjoyable, but everything else just kinda fell by the wayside. Not much else for me to say here, so yeah. Lightyear. I loved Socks, and the animation was great per Pixar standards, but unfortunately the script was a mess with some generic story beats and a horrible twist villain. Luck. The only thing that really did the admittedly good concepts justice in my eyes would be with the beautiful animation. If only the writing and world building could have also been that way. Moonfall. The great visuals could not make up for how atrocious the writing and pacing were. And that's just about it, because this movie is boring. Night at the Museum, Kamun-Ra rises again. As someone who liked the live-action trilogy, this movie really didn't do those movies justice with a formulaic and by-the-numbers script and its title villain making Amy Schumer look like comedy gold. Scream 5. No suspense involving the main mystery coupled with obnoxious meta-humor. Can't wait to see the sequel. Thor: Love and Thunder. I really wanted this movie to be what turned the MCU around after they saw a sudden influx of mediocre content. And while there were some good things here like the soundtrack, a few good scenes, and Jane's arc as the new mighty Thor, Love and Thunder was unfortunately unable to be Marvel's redemption arc with its painful humor and half-baked concepts. Maybe Marvel can finally turn things around in Phase 5, because this was easily one of the worst projects in not only Phase 4, but also the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. And finally, Uncharted. I've never played the game, so for my introduction, it was just kinda there. It's really boring and the actors don't have any good chemistry whatsoever, but I guess some of the action scenes were fun, so at least it was able to just about escape the bottom 10. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for.
Disappointment in the game of life!
Well, here we are, the worst film of 2022. There was a lot of garbage this year, but one movie in particular was able to stand out from the rest in just how devoid of substance it was. And that movie was The Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild. Now, I'm sure that at this point, we all know what happened to the creator of the Ice Age franchise, Blue Sky Studios. Disney, who bought Blue Sky's parent company 20th Century Studios in 2019, closed Blue Sky down, laying off hundreds of employees and canceling all of their future projects, with the exception of Nimona, which was originally canned despite being a good way through production, but it was later picked up by Netflix and will be completed and released this year. So, with Blue Sky being killed by Disney, you'd expect that their flagship franchise, Ice Age, would be done and dusted, right? Especially with how terrible the previous installment, Collision Course, was, right? Well, as previously mentioned, Disney's greed knows no bounds, so they've decided to keep milking the Ice Age and Rio franchises bone dry even after their creator was shut down. And this brings us to The Adventures of Buck Wild, which is a pretty misleading title if I say so myself, because this movie actually focuses on Crash and Eddie, aka the two most obnoxious little shits in the entire Ice Age franchise. Don't worry, they're still annoying, but what about the character this movie's highlighting as the lead? Buck's just kinda there. He severely lacks the same charm and eccentricity he had in Dawn of the Dinosaurs, and he doesn't even have any good chemistry with his new female counterpart. Speaking of chemistry and characters and stuff, the voice actors were just terrible. Okay, maybe Simon Pegg was trying to salvage this, but otherwise, all the voice actors either didn't give a shit or they were just completely obnoxious, especially with the VA they got to replace John Leguizamo as Sid.
Okay, let's work this out like a family. Manny, use your feeling words. I feel God, I feel...
So, as you can tell, there's barely any substance to be found here whatsoever. The writing and pacing are excruciatingly boring, none of the jokes are funny, the villain is irritating, the dialogue is tedious, and the voice acting sucks. Can it at least keep the franchise's tradition of having progressively better looking animation with each installment?
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the f*** is that?
Yeah, no. The animation is just, well, it sucks. The rendering is terrible, the environments are boring, there's nothing interesting cinematography-wise, and the character animation is unfathomably awful. And I have nothing against the animators who worked on this at Bardell Entertainment, with that studio also providing the animation for the animated Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies. They've made some decent looking animation in the past, and I'm sure that the animators were trying to work with the materials they were given, but the materials they were given ended up making the previously mentioned Wimpy Kid movies look like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. At this point, why should I drag this part out for longer than it needs to be? The movie may not be as infuriatingly bad as, say, Marmaduke, but it's honestly one of the most empty experiences I've had watching a film in recent memory. It was flat out depressing seeing not only how it dragged the Ice Age franchise deeper into the dirt than it already did with Collision Course, but that this is also the only value Disney was able to find in an entire studio. I'm not gonna act like Blue Sky's filmography was perfect. In fact, their output was usually quite mediocre, but when they got something right, they got it right, and I could tell that the animators and storytellers working there were passionate about their craft. I'm saying this because the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild lacks any sort of passion, heart, or soul behind it. It's just there so Disney could make a quick buck off their streaming service, and that is why the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild is easily my #1 least favorite film of 2022. So with all that said and done, you might be wondering to yourself, well, why do I subject myself to garbage like all of that? Well, I think there's actually some value to be found in watching bad movies. It can help us to better appreciate what we like and help us to actively seek more good content. Plus, it's kind of fun to make fun of these movies for their failures so that all of you watching can at least get a feel for how I felt watching them. I'm sure there'll be plenty more awful movies in store for me in 2023, but at the same time, there's also plenty of great looking ones on the horizon as well. So all in all, I'm sure this year of Isaac reviews will be just fine. Anyways, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!